I want to give a real quick read of Glenn's bio before we get started. I don't know if I'll read the whole thing, but Glenn Martin, before launching both GEM Real Estate and GEM Trainers, Glenn founded and served as president of Just Leadership USA, an organization he built as a tribute to his son, Joshua, dedicated to cutting the U.S. correctional population in half by 2030. For almost 22 years since leaving prison, he's been a part of the vanguard of successful reform advocates in America. His leadership has been recognized with multiple honors, including the 2016 Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award, the 2017 Brooke Astor Award, and the 2014 Echoing Green Fellowship. He's also a founding member of the Council on Criminal Justice. Prior to founding Just Leadership USA, Glenn was the vice president of the Fortune Society, where he founded and led the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy. He also served as the co-director of the National Hire Network and the Legal Action Center, and co-founded the Education from the Inside Out Coalition. He's also the founder and visionary behind the Close Rikers campaign. That's hashtag Close Rikers in New York City. Glenn has served as a public speaker and has been a media guest, appearing on national news outlets such as NPR, MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, Al Jazeera, and C-SPAN. You can follow him at Glenn E. Martin on Twitter. All right, my brother. I hope that's a sufficient buffer between that video and having you speak so you don't feel so much pressure.
I just want to say my name is Glenn. I'm born in Brooklyn and love is the answer. How about that? That feels like where I should start, just so I can connect a little more closely with those young folks.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, like I said, man, it's so good to have you here. We talk from time to time, not often enough, but I'm constantly seeing you doing great things. And I have some questions for you, but I just want to lead off with this, man. You're doing some amazing work in real estate, and you're not just a landlord. You're actually really making a difference in people's lives. Can you share a little bit? And I'm so fond of you for this, man, because my brother Abby, who this day is really for, and for me personally, he spent time in prison. And he was a painting contractor, and when he got out of prison the last time, you know, his life just blossomed, and he really served the community, and he became like the favorite painting contractor in all of DC, and all the politicians and celebrities and so forth went to him. And he just, every time he was out on a job, he would do something good for someone else. He didn't wait for Christmas or Thanksgiving to roll around. Literally every time I saw him, and he was my brother, so I saw him a lot, every single time I was with him, he would do something for someone else. And you just strike me as, you know, kind of being Abby-esque. I just have this bond with you, man, that you don't even realize the depths of it, how fond I am of you for the work that you do. So can you just share a little bit about what you do on a daily?
Sure. I feel honored to be Abby-esque. I'm going to own that. So I got into real estate a few years ago, and, you know, honestly, wasn't sure why. I think I was trying to diversify income and take on a new challenge and so on. I had spent 17 plus years in nonprofit, and just naturally, I started asking myself, how can I do good and do well? How can I, you know, make money, build generational wealth, try to help Joshua, my son, and my other children from ending up in the criminal justice system the way I did, and yet at the same time support people who need a place to live that allows them to maintain their human dignity. And maybe part of it is I grew up really poor, on public assistance, single parent household, on Section 8. And so I initially bought a couple of pretty expensive units in Savannah, Georgia, and realized quickly that I just couldn't afford to stay in that part of the market. and then went across Martin Luther King Boulevard. And you can guess where the rest of the story goes when you hear the name of the boulevard. You know, I was really in the hood now, purchasing property. And what I realized was, you know, forget about just buying housing units and renting them short-term vacation rentals. Like, I could really have impact in the hood by buying properties and extracting the equity that was in these units. Like, essentially, the people who own these units before me, just about every unit I buy, have neglected them. And probably because the people they were renting to don't have a lot of power to push back on landlords who are not doing the right thing. But what it meant for me is I could buy houses with equity in them, with resources that I could extrapolate from the unit. And most people do that and keep it for themselves. I do that and fix these houses back to their original condition: new roofs, new HVAC systems, new walls, new cabinets, et cetera, et cetera. And I always ask myself and ask my contractors, is this a place where you would live? And if the answer is no, then we need to keep going until we get it to be the kind of place that we can feel proud living or having someone in our family live. And so, yeah, I went from 1 or 2 units to 92 in less than 3 years, because I've figured out sort of how to do this in a very formulaic way. And also important, I work with formerly incarcerated people to get the job done. So my contractors are formerly incarcerated. I primarily rent to people who are formerly incarcerated and Section 8. I will find attorneys that are formerly incarcerated. I will find real estate agents who are formerly incarcerated. My real estate advisor is formerly incarcerated. And part of that is to send the world a message, which I've tried for many, many years, that we lock up some of America's best and brightest. And, you know, we can keep doing more of what doesn't work, or we can do more of what works. And what works, in my opinion, is giving people a sense of dignity, resources, and opportunity to take care of themselves and their families. Because part of what landed me in the criminal justice system was just a series of poor decisions, primarily based around socioeconomic issues. But even people who go to prison for more serious issues, that stuff is usually contextual. It's usually about where they live, what's going on in their lives, access to mental health care, and so on. Anyway, that's why I'm able to do good and do well, is because I have figured out a way to be mission driven, even in my real estate practice.
So most people, when they leave prison, they try to forget everything about what they experienced. And you've spent every day since then trying to help others who have been incarcerated. Why? Why not just try to forget and move on?
Yeah, thanks for that question. You know, there's stories about Jesus Christ going into prisons, and people think he went into prisons to help people who were in prison. I would argue that he also went into prison because he got a lot from people who were in prison. I had the opportunity to earn a quality 2-year liberal arts degree while I was on the inside. And so my prison experience was, yes, it was prison, but it was also the kind of experience that people get when they go to universities and they're part of a cohort of people who are moving through the college experience. And I just realized that some of the deepest contributions to my life and my personality and my character came from the men who I was incarcerated with. And people think when you go to prison, you have a sense of what you're about to get into. But what they don't realize is, you know, if you've never been to prison before, you're figuring it out just like anyone else, and you're coming with all of your biases just like anyone else. You watch television, you know, you think that prison is just people killing each other all day, every day. And if that were true, I guess we wouldn't have to worry about feeding people in prison. They'd all kill each other, but that's just not the case. There are people in prison who are there trying to better their lives, trying to turn their lives around. And so I developed some of the deepest bonds with men who, you know, when you think of all the material things we have out here to serve as a mask and as a filter, those things don't exist in prison. All you have left is your character. You don't have the fancy car or the fancy home or the fancy job. Those things are gone. And so you get to see people in their most sort of quintessential version of themselves. And you get to see humanity in a very raw and visceral way. And there's nothing I've experienced in life that could have prepared me for that, but nothing I've experienced since then has been anywhere close to that experience of understanding human beings in such a deep way. And so when I walked out, prison was a difficult experience. I thought I was going to do 3 years. I ended up doing 6, could have done 9. And the one day that I was brought to tears was the day I was leaving on my way out. And it was because of all the amazing people I was leaving behind. And I realized in that moment that I would carry them with me, even if I didn't continue to be in contact with them, that I always try to judge my decision making on whether or not I can stand in front of a person who's in a cage and have my dignity and intact by asking them, am I doing the right thing, and hearing their response. And so, I don't always get it right. No human being always gets it right. But I have learned to carry with me that litmus test that helps me to make decisions in life. And so, I don't know, I can't imagine life any other way. I mean, it's not that I don't like people who've never been to prison, but I just, when you go through a shared traumatic experience, you want to reach back, at least I do, want to reach back and pull people up. And I also find that, you make your friends in the valley, not on the mountaintop. Like, when you're in the valleys, when you realize who your people really are, who's your tribe, who's going to be there through tough times. And man, I can't think of a deeper valley than the prison experience.
Wow. So last week you tweeted, and by the way, if y'all aren't following Glenn's Twitter account, you need to, because he's dropping some really cool stuff on there every single day. I don't know how you get anything done, actually, because you're always on Twitter. But anyway, last week you tweeted people don't own their decisions and show up differently when all you have to offer is punishment. No one runs toward retribution. So what is the role of love and compassion in our effort to end mass incarceration, Glenn?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So let me respond to the Twitter joke you just made, which is the reason it's so easy for me to do social media in the middle of 14, 15 meetings a day is that I really do tweet stream of thought. What's in my heart and mind is what I put out there. I find that we have all figured out ways to filter ourselves. And, you are as weak as your secrets. You are as weak as the things that you're hiding from people. And so I don't hide things from people. I show up as my full self. Maybe it's my age, maybe it's my experiences and trials in life, but I have come to find out that the vulnerability of being truthful about my humanity is a powerful place to live and a powerful place to be. And to answer your question about what I tweeted the other day, we unfortunately live in a country where we are punishing each other. Like, this, who we are and what we do, it's become part of our DNA. And, we can't even settle and move on until someone has been punished, even in situations where there were mistakes made or no one seems to be culpable. It seems like until someone gets punished, we are not settled. And when they are, we move on, except the question we should be asking ourselves is, what are we doing to avoid those kinds of things happening again? What are we doing to make survivors of crime whole again? What are we doing to make it so that people who've committed a crime won't commit it again? And if you look at our criminal justice system, we have a failure rate of upwards of 70% of people going back over 5 years. I can't think of any other industry that would operate with that sort of failure rate and continue to be fed resources. And so the question for me is, what can we do differently? And what can we do when a person commits a crime to recognize that we all hold a little bit of responsibility around that? And how do we make that person whole again in a way that's not just about the hammer hanging over their heads? Like, what is the opportunity? Like, I was told I could go to college sitting in a prison. That was the first time anyone had ever said that to me. That could have been said to me years earlier in high school, but it wasn't. And I'll never forget that day. I mean, I may never recognize that person if I walk by them in the street here in New York, but at the same time, I will never forget the experience of having someone see something in me that I might not have even seen in myself in that moment. So how can we develop a criminal justice system where love is the answer, where compassion matters, where redemption matters, where restoration matters, where parsimony matters, where proportionality matters. Things that make it so that there is an opportunity and space for people who have violated the social contract, done something wrong, to see something in themselves that they may not even see in that moment, but yet develop not just a vision that they can head toward, but recognize that people have something else for them besides just hatred and punitiveness, that people have opportunity, people have love, people have caring, people have support, people who feel marginalized, people who sleep under bridges, people who are told you're not part of us. What do they have to lose? You know, when you're making hard decisions about whether to reoffend, even in times of crisis, even socioeconomic issues, you know, you make those decisions relatively easily if you don't think there's someone you're really going to hurt, someone who cares about you, someone who supports you. So I find that the more we can do to support people, which is the opposite of what they expect. You always got to give people the opposite of what they expect, whether it's a boxing match or whether it's the criminal justice system, because people come in with an expectation that you're going to try to take everything away from them, try to destroy them, try to punish them. And, you know, we live in a country where we have this ceremony at sentencing where people are knocked down a few levels. You committed a crime, you're found guilty, you're no longer one of us, you're going to go away to this place with these high walls, with these towers, with these guns, you're going to be punished. And then you do your time and you get out and there's no ceremony to bring you back up. We leave you there. That's the country we live in. And so I was particularly intrigued about the opportunity to be on this call, because when I hear love is the answer, I feel like if advocates and organizers and activists and law enforcement and researchers and everyone else who thinks about these issues would see love as the answer as an important part of their work, then I think that we can move away from the kind of tribalism that got us here in this country, whether it's political or otherwise, and just do more to see each other as brothers, as friends, as neighbors.
Wow, that's incredible, Glenn. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of comments in the chat. This should be a TED Talk. Bernita said that her day has been truly blessed to hear this message. I agree. I'm deeply moved. I knew you were going to bring it, but you're just really touching my heart. You know, so I want to follow up on what you just talked about, you know, bringing people together and, you know, people doing these good things together. After George Floyd was murdered, a lot of companies made commitments, and 98% of those companies have not fulfilled those commitments, right? In fact, we had a company that we were dealing with that made a huge commitment. And then when it came down to doing the work, they were afraid. They backed off. They didn't want to do it because it was going to be too hard on them. They didn't want to confront the things that needed to be confronted within their own organization in order to be able to help people in their community. So likewise, most advocates take on issues that feel kind of relatively easily winnable, right? They don't stretch themselves, but you decide to work to close Rikers Island in New York City. Why?
Yeah, I am the type to grab the dragon by the face. You know why? I'll tell you why. Because there's a lot of people who disagree with me. There's a lot of people who disagree with advocates who are doing work to shrink the footprint of our criminal justice system. And if you start by capitulating on any part of their positioning, then you kind of enter a slippery slope and sort of negotiate against yourself. So I start in the deepest end of the pool. Like, what are the places where we punish people the most? What are the places where we as human beings can maybe take a look at ourselves and say, I don't want that to exist in my name. Rikers Island was purchased from a guy named Richard Riker, who used to be the head of our court system in New York. Well, at nighttime, Richard Riker was the head of the Kidnap Club. And the Kidnap Club used to go grab young, free Black men in New York City, bring them in front of his court the next day, and send them back to the slaveholding South. That's the history of that piece of land in New York, one of the most allegedly progressive, resource-rich cities in the country. And yet it is an island that, if you look at the history of it, it has just been used for the worst of the worst issues for human beings. And right now, as an island, it's built next to an airport. So they actually built the architecture in a way that you wouldn't even build a jail. And it's built that way to allow the planes to be able to take off and land without the obstruction of taller buildings. So the buildings are flat and long, which is not helpful for correction officers and not helpful for people who want to go to programs and people who want to go to lunch. And it's just become a very violent place. The architecture itself, all of the buildings are beyond their shelf life. So if you want a weapon, you just rip it out of the wall. Literally, the facility is falling apart and allows for the creation of weapons. So when I was there, when I was 16, because in New York, 16-year-olds up until about 4 years ago was charged as adults. I was in a cell because a judge wanted to teach me a lesson and sent me there with $1,500 bail. Well, if you're poor, $1,500 might as well be $15 million because it felt like ransom. And I get to Rikers, and on my way to court a couple of days later to see that same judge, I was in a cell, and a young child, I'm deliberately saying child, we were children, approached me and said, "Give me your leather jacket." And when I said no, because on Rikers you have two choices, predator or prey, we started fighting. And in the middle of that fight, I could tell I was not only being jumped by multiple young guys in that cell, but that I started to get stabbed. And I was stabbed 4 times with a pen that was melted into a dagger. And I will never forget coming out of that cell and the correction officers telling me that if I got medical care, I'd be considered a snitch and I wouldn't be able to go to court. And then I went to court, and I remember that judge never owning his responsibility for sending me to such a draconian place that was like a real human grist mill. But also, here it is many, many years later, decades later, and it's no different. When I say it's no different, I am not exaggerating. Like, it is no different. And I decided that one of the things I would take on is the closure of this place, because it is one of the worst places we have to offer that we refer to as corrections. And I felt as though if we could get this place closed and come up with something that was more humane, allowed people to have their dignity, even if they had to do time, especially because 80+% of the people there are not even convicted of a crime, they're detainees, that if we could show the rest of the country that that place could be shut down, then it would give people hope that there's other parts of the criminal justice system that we could grasp and do something about. And so that's why I started out with the most difficult. Like, I like to go into the deep end of the pool because it makes everything else feel like low-hanging fruit.
Wow, Glenn. I want to go back to one thing you said, man. You were 16 years old when you were sent there. You were a baby. You were a kid. And
yeah, the human brain doesn't even fully form. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And so you were in the same place as folks in their late 20s, mid 30s. Very, very violent place.
Yeah, very, very violent place with adults. But, you know, honestly, even when I think of the adults, I mean, once I ended up in state prison years later, after being on Rikers the second time, state prison was totally different. It's not that it was a joy, but it wasn't Rikers. And there's something about Rikers at its core that makes it the kind of place that it is. It's an island, so it's isolated. Even in a city of 9 million people, it's very isolated. One way on, one way off. And the correction officers, unfortunately, because of their own fear, partially because, you know, there's a lot of people of color as correction officers, and they get angry to see other people of color coming there and doing time and feel like it speaks poorly of them. So there's that kind of retribution that happens. There's just all sorts of reasons why that physical plant is just a terrible place and why it has generated the kind of culture that it has. So yes, I was young. And, you know, it's easier, of course, to be thoughtful and compassionate about the opportunities for young people, especially because the human brain doesn't fully develop until the age of 24. But I would argue that no one should be on that island. That island should be leveled and turned into an extra runway for LaGuardia Airport. It's only 300 feet away.
Well, Glenn, I have one more question for you, and then I'm gonna ask a couple of people to comment or ask you questions. One of them is going to be Cliff Wright, and I'm choosing him first because he's a fellow New Yorker. And Cliff is in the film as well. He had a beautiful role in the film. But my last question for you, my man, is you spent 17 years in the nonprofit space, and now you've switched to the private sector as a vehicle to help people who have been in prison, which I love. You shared a little bit about what you're doing with housing, which is so commendable. And one of these days, we're going to have to do something with you. Maybe when we do the Love is the Answer TV series, which we plan on starting to film next summer, maybe we can do a project with you on one of those rehabs and get our supporters from around the country to pony up some time and money and help out with a family. So what else are you doing? Because I know you're a busy man. You're a mogul. You're an entrepreneur. What else are you doing, and why are you doing those other things as well?
Yeah, so I have been blessed to build a portfolio that's worth about $10 million, which is, shocking to me sometimes. I wake up and ask myself, what do I do with that? I am investing in other formerly incarcerated people by also helping them to figure out how to build wealth. I lived in the nonprofit space for a really long time, and for all of its good, there's also some inherent challenges in trying to change the world from that space. It can be it's a space that's made up of institutions, and institutions can be very conservative. And we don't need conservatism in how we approach such a hairy and audacious issue, if you will. We need people who are willing to take risks. And in some ways, the institutions created the sort of professionalization of good work can be problematic sometimes. People don't say things like the word love. Just before I got on, I said to my partner, I said, I'm about to get on a call and you're going to hear me use the word love over and over. Don't worry, it's a work-related call. Because, people in the nonprofit space, it's become so professionalized that you can't even use words like love without finding yourself in a controversial situation. And so I said to myself, let me see if there are other vehicles to do things differently, and to invest in other formerly incarcerated people. So I've helped 21 other formerly incarcerated people to move into wealth and into real estate. And they themselves now are also housing poor people, housing formerly incarcerated people, hiring formerly incarcerated people. So it's not the traditional model of getting a person a job, which has value. I mean, my first job, I was making $16,000 a year when I got out of prison, but it was a job, and it was a place where there was an opportunity for growth. But I do believe there are people out there like myself who are entrepreneurial, who can start their own businesses, do well, obviously take care of their families, their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, break the sort of generational trauma of prison and incarceration. The other thing you didn't mention, which people are going to be like, oh my God, is, I run two businesses, not just the real estate business. I have a nonprofit consultancy. I've worked with about 55 different nonprofits. I built that 5 years ago, about a year before I got into real estate, a year and a half. That business does well. I have about 8 subcontractors. Most of them are either formerly incarcerated or have addiction issues, et cetera, et cetera. And we work with nonprofit leaders to help them navigate some of these corporations that you're referring to that made these huge commitments after George Floyd. We help them raise money, but more importantly, what I do is I get to choose who I work with, and I get to work with people whose values match my own, and I get to even move them along as leaders. Some of the best work I do, as you know, I travel all over the place. I just sent to my itinerary this morning. I have like 10 trips in the next 40 days. But what I get to do is I get to invest in leaders as a coach. I get to do individualized coaching with people who are out there trying to lead. And I just help them sort of demystify what that means. You know, they say leadership is a lonely place, and that's hard for people to understand until they end up in that situation. But part of it is that you may have other leaders around you, but everyone is sort of head down, focused on the thing they care about the most. And the other thing is, you know, people tend to think there's some sort of roadmap on how to be a leader. And there really isn't. You really have to leap and build the wings on your way down. And what I find in coaching people is I'm really just helping them to trust themselves and have faith, and to be kind to themselves and kind to each other. That's a big part of what I do. People pay me well for it. Great. I'm glad. I think I've seen so much crisis in my life that I'm able to help people navigate crises. But that's the other huge part of my life. In fact, believe it or not, that's about 70% of my life. The real estate is about 30%.
Beautiful. And I know you work out, you stay fit, and you have to with all that travel that you don't. Look at those guns, man. Put that gun away. Inspiring with your workouts.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up, because people would say, oh, well, he works so much, he probably doesn't have time for himself. Number one, as soon as I close this computer, I'm going hiking. Number
Nice.
two, I build the things I care about into my schedule. So I build my workouts into my schedule. I build my yoga into my schedule. I even build walks into my schedule. I don't do 1 hour calls. I do 45-minute calls so that I can do something for 15 minutes in between. So thanks for saying that, because I think wellness is really important. Sometimes when we get involved in doing good work, we think we have to give it every bit of our lives. But the truth is, we become better leaders when we have more balance in our lives, time with our children, time with our family, time with our loved ones, time in our communities, and so on.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. So I got two folks that are going to ask you questions before we go on to the next speaker. Glenn, man, I'm so thankful, brother. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to have Cliff Wright unmute, and I'm going to put him on spotlight. Let's see here. Here we go. Cliff is in the film. He's in Maryland now. He spent many years in Hawaii. He grew up in New York. Cliff, you want to unmute yourself, brother? And then we'll have Bernita. And then we'll have Joel Freeman joining us at 4:15. You having a little trouble getting your mute removed? There you go.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm really glad to be here with you all. Hey Randy. Well, I don't really have a question. What I really want to do is acknowledge you. I'm a native New Yorker, born and bred, from Harlem, Harlem boy. And
that's where I live, Harlem. I live in Harlem.
What'd you say?
I live in Harlem.
Right on. You know what City College is at, St. Nicholas Terrace?
Right up the block.
That's where I grew up. My family was one of the first Black families to live in that community. So we go way back there. But more than that, I want to just acknowledge the power in your words and in your sharing, especially speaking to this group of people, because this is a group of people who will take that out into the world and do something with it, not just hear it, but I mean, like, embody it, embrace it, and I'm one of those people. When you spoke, it's deeply, deeply moving, but also super upsetting for me. Rikers Island, I know about that place. The Brooklyn House of Detention, I know about that place. Attica Prison, I know about those places. Every one of those places has destroyed the life of someone I love. You know what happens there. It is the belly, the bosom of evil. My cousin who saved my life on the streets of New York from the gangs in Brooklyn went into Attica, and when he came out, his soul was sucked out of him by what happened to him there. That you've come out of that place whole and healthy and able is extraordinary, because I know what goes on there, and it's hard to relate it to other people. But I've looked into the eyes of one of my best friends after he came out of the Brooklyn House of Detention. This is a kid who was on his way to medical school. And because of some racist cop who stopped us in the middle of the night and took the drugs out of his pocket, threw it on the ground. Pardon my language, he said, "You going to jail, nigga." You know, took this boy and he disappeared from us for like almost 3 months. It took his family a month and a half to find him. And the next time I saw him, it was like he was not there. You know, like you talk about taking a child and putting them into those situations, you know? So your sharing for me is deeply, deeply moving and personal, you know? And so I just want to thank you for sharing that here. But more than that, I just want to acknowledge the incredible grace and dignity you show in the aftermath of that. You've been to hell and came out of it with an angelic presence. I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but that's my experience of it. You came out of it in a way where you were able to give life and love and light into the world. And that, brother, is extraordinary. So thank you for being here and sharing that. I want to say this also. I met a guy years ago who started a thing called the Kindness Project, you know, and and he was a man like yourself who came out of prison. And he said, you know, what he saw there it was just horrific. But what he saw is that the orientation of systems, what you're speaking to really, it's punishment and full rehabilitation, you know, but really what was cruelty, you know, it dishonors the human spirit. And he said, if we made this one change, if we were oriented towards kindness, we would produce completely, and a lot of what you say, you know, speaks to that. And he started the project and it was starting to happen, but it kind of never really took hold, you know? And I've not heard anyone speak to it as brilliantly in the decades since I heard him talk until now. So I want to acknowledge you for that. For me personally, calling it forward again, because I've been sitting with that notion for a long time. And now to hear you speak, but more than speak it, you're living it and making it a possibility in the world and for others. And again, for people like the kind of folks who show up on a call like this, you know? So again, I really didn't have a question. I really just want to speak from my heart what I see and what I hear and underline the power of it and the beauty of it. There's grace and dignity in your words. And I want you to know I appreciate it. I appreciate your presence for bringing that, to having that be present in the experience of incarceration, in the experience of people returning to our communities, you know, beyond the stigma, beyond the enormous challenges they face when they return. I'm living in Baltimore. Baltimore has something like 3,000 or 4,000 people a year come back into the city from the system with no opportunities, very few programs set up for them, and a governor who wants to build more prisons rather than programs to help people live whole and well once they return, you know? So what you speak to is powerful. Now, this is the last thing I will say. This is a technical point between activists. I have a commitment that we give up this thing called not profit. I think that's a misstatement and it dishonors what we do, okay? It is a social profit realm that we are operating in. So I would invite you to kind of change the language a little bit because the language has power, you know, and we do produce profit. I've done products, been part of projects that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars and saved thousands and hundreds of thousands of people's lives. That is profit, but it's not capitalism in the sense of me making money, but me enriching the quality of life, you know, for others and for humanity. So I invite you to, you know, join me in changing that subtle but very powerful language in how and regarding what we do, because not what you're doing is extraordinarily profitable for this society. You know, you take a brother who's getting out of prison and, you know, trying to make it and got no money, trying to get government help, blah, 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 turn him into an entrepreneur. Wow. Who's creating jobs for other people, building things that contribute to our society, that's profit. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because I kind of got a commitment to that, to social
Yeah.
entrepreneurship, being really
Yeah.
acknowledged for what it is. Now shut up.
No, thank you for those kind words, Cliff, and particularly the end part around nonprofits. I've been looking for a term to describe what I see, the places where we have a blind side to what's really happening in that space. So that's a great place for me to shift language, and language matters. I agree. If you notice, I haven't used language like prisoner, convict, inmates on purpose in this conversation, because I agree language matters.
Thank you, Cliff. I appreciate you, brother. We're gonna have you back on in a little bit. I'm gonna remove the spotlight. I'm gonna share screen just for 1 second. Y'all, this is Abby. This is my brother. This was a photo that was taken while he was in prison. Abby passed away in 1998 of cancer, and he passed away on September 17th, 1998. Abby was the man who taught me that love is the answer by living it out. And this man who spent time in prison for drugs and manslaughter, the second half of his life was absolutely glorious. And like I said, there wasn't a time that I was with him that I didn't see him do something for someone else, whether it was going to buy groceries or giving somebody money or buying toys for children nonstop. That was him. And so he's the reason why Love is the Answer Day takes place on this day. Because I want the world to know how much love matters, and that it lives on even after you're gone, that what you do here matters. And Glenn, what you do here matters to a lot of people, and your work is going to go on for generations, long past the time that you're walking on this earth, brother. The difference that you're making right now is like the difference that Abby made for so many people. You're going to get your flowers while you're here on earth. You're going to get some of them today, but we hope that you're here for decades longer. Hopefully you're here for another 60 years, and your legacy, man, is just going to be just overwhelmingly powerful around the world. So we appreciate you so much. I have one more question for you, and that's going to come from Bernita Walker. Bernita, I'm going to ask you to take yourself off mute. And by the way, it was because of people like you, Glenn, and people like Bernita that made it possible for my brother to turn his life around. And so I know the power that y'all have in the way that you live your lives, on both ends of the coast, one East Coast, one West Coast, different stories, but same result, that you're making a powerful difference in people's lives. So thank you. Bernita?
Thank you, AJ. And Glenn, very glad to meet you. I thank you so much for you sharing your story. It is so important that people understand where you've come from and where you are now. I am married to an ex-convict, and so I understand that part of it. I'm also a retired deputy sheriff, so I understand that part of it as well. And I work in the field of domestic violence and intimate partner violence because I understand that part of it also. So I want to just encourage you. Well, I don't have to encourage you because you're already doing what needs to be done. But there are so many people that need to hear your story. I was the one that talked about you being on TED Talk. This needs to get out more, because there are men in particular who have spent time in prison who are not doing anything because they don't know what to do or how to do it. And that is a deep problem with our culture, period, because our boys don't know what to do because they can't be taught, but the issues that are going on. So thank you so much for being willing to share. Do you, and I know that you travel because you already said that you travel. Are you ever in the Los Angeles area, and do you do this particular talk in different cities such as Los Angeles? Because I definitely want to stay in contact and know about that, because I have individuals that need to hear you. There's a program called CRESLA, which is the Community Resource System of South Los Angeles. And I don't know how much you know about South Los Angeles, but it's like Harlem. Okay. And they
Yeah.
need to hear
Yeah.
this. And I know that so okay, I'll stop asking my question and stop talking.
Yeah,
I can
no,
talk.
it's
And so
cool. Yeah, no, thanks for that. It's always good to talk to people who come from multiple perspectives. So I appreciated you sort of helping me understand your identity. My dad was a chief of police in the country where my family's from. And my dad is white, my mother's black. My brother grew up to be a correction officer, a federal correction officer, and then a U.S. Marshal. So I'm surrounded by sort of multiple perspectives, if you will, and that is part of who I am. And I really appreciate people who come together around those identities and are honest about them, and then still ready to engage in dialogue. Again, I think it's what we don't do enough of in this country. So I travel a lot. I just got back from LA. I was in LA a week and a half ago. I'm heading back to the Bay in a couple of weeks. I still do public speaking from time to time, and I would love to stay in touch and figure out whether there's an opportunity next time I'm in LA or next time I'm even in the Bay Area, such a short trip to head over to LA. So I appreciate you honoring my words, and I think we should stay in touch and make it happen. Let's just make it happen.
thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right.
AJ,
Well, thank you
get
so
that
much.
information to me, right?
Absolutely. I can connect y'all, or if you want, you can connect with each other in the chat. You can do that privately, or if you want to share any information with everyone, you can do that as well. Bernita, thank you so much. And Glenn, I appreciate you deeply, man. Really, really do.
Yeah, likewise. This was an amazing opportunity. I didn't know what I signed up for, but it was well worth it. And, this is a great group of people, and you're an amazing leader. I appreciate you, and I will see you and hopefully the rest of you on Twitter.
Awesome. Yes, indeed.